Welcome to another episode of the Dads Making a Difference podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of having a conversation with a fellow educator, school administrator, and father. Today, I'm having a conversation with Leroy Slanzi. He is an experienced educator, which is close to my heart, having been in education for a while. But Leroy has been in for 25 years and has had a remarkable educational career where he has worked as a teacher, a special education teacher, vice principal, and now he leads powerful personal and professional development sessions in which he helps parents and communities through the chaos that life brings. He's also an author, and he's penned an influential book called Emotional Schools, where he dove into the importance of emotional intelligence and mental health in the education system. Our conversation will touch on that, but goes into how does emotional intelligence and mental health impact our children in the home, and how as parents and dads can we show up to be connected, in tune, and present for our kids in a way that's going to develop grit and emotional intelligence and emotional resilience. This is an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed this one. So dive in to my conversation with Leroy Slanzi on the Dads Making a Difference podcast right now. Leroy, welcome to the Dads Making a Difference podcast. Great to see you today.
You too, Cam.
Yeah, a little pre-call chat just now. We were talking about the beginning of summer. For those of you who have listened to this podcast, you know that I'm an educator, been in education for a long time, but a vice principal. Leroy, you find yourself in the principal seat and also closing off a year.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, it's this is actually my 25th year. This is I'm at the quarter century mark of doing this gig. I've been in admin for about 19 years now. So yeah, these summers keep coming faster and faster and faster. So Here we are.
Yeah, excellent. And I think with that 25 years experience comes a depth of knowledge and interactions with people about the topic we're talking about today, and that's emotional intelligence. And I love where you come from it because education, it's in my heart. I love it. I've done, now this is finishing year 18 for me. And so looking ahead, I'm just like, where does this impact and where does this parallel the journey of education and parenting, especially in a time where so much goes around in the media, so much on social media about where kids are at, where kids, quote unquote, need to be in the role that school and parenting both play in that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I did a podcast with a guy from Chicago about a month ago. And we were talking about the perfect storm in terms of parenting and education. We're at this place where, we're not where we were when our industry was more resource based. I mean, in Alberta, it's still there's still a lot of oil workers, and still here in BC, we have people going out and working on the rigs. But, logging is not as big as it was. The sawmills aren't as big as it was. Mining is still pretty big. But there's been this shift in terms of how society is. We've gone from mom being at home and having this family where you got a mom and a dad and you're eating dinner together every night, and to a place now where 80% of our kids are from divorced homes. Mom and dad are both working. Social media is taken over. COVID came in and ran amok. Sleep deprivation is a big thing. Parents are running out of gas to come home and work on things with their kids, like literally like manners, for example. And so we're in this world and this state where we have kids who are more dysregulated, more unable to cope with small stressors. As you know, being in a school, you probably see it more and more. Attendance in schools is plummeting. That perseverance, that grit, that resiliency to work through difficult things is disappearing. And I think parents are lost, and I think schools are lost. And, that's kind of where I've jumped in the last 6 or 7 years, writing my book on emotional schools and this looming mental health crisis. And I wrote a book on leadership as well, and using emotional intelligent practices in leadership and in schools. And And I also do a lot of work with parents on helping them develop emotional intelligence in their kids from birth on, right?
Yeah.
And we need to do it because, our kids are lacking, and we're in a perfect storm of mess almost with our kids.
Yeah, I see it too. I have lots of conversations with parents throughout the year. And these are parents of kids at the high school level. We're talking like 15 to 18-year olds. And the parents like, I just can't get them to attend. I just can't get them to finish their work. They don't respond to me. They don't do stuff at home. I don't know what to do. It's your job to make them go to class. I'm like, I can't handhold this kid to class. So let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about like how we can reach this kid, your kid, your child, in a way that we can start to elicit some buy-in and some connection, because they feel so disconnected, one from the school and their peers, and disconnected from home. So I see it too. And I'd like that you said right now we're struggling at home, we're struggling in education, but right now we don't know how to blend the two and mend the two so that we can work together to help our kids. You mentioned, emotional intelligence even from
Mm-hmm.
birth. I want to start there because I think that is the start. That is the start for the parenting journey. So for the dads who are listening to this podcast right now, it's called Dads Making a Difference for a reason. There's guys who are listening to this. So I want to show up more intentionally. I want to be a better father. I want to be present. I want to be actively engaged. And then they're like, how do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And
How do I
so,
be how do I be more
yeah,
purposeful as a parent, right?
exactly.
And I think, you asked the question, how do we do it? Well, I know how to do it. I don't want to sound
Yeah.
overconfident in that. But really, and I was, before I was the elementary principal here, I was the high school principal for 5 years. I've been in three high schools, and I have two teenagers. My son's in first year college. My daughter's going into grade 12, and I know what it's like for parents to try to get their kids out the door, get them going to class, because school's boring,
Mm.
because they're on social media, and I call them the 60-second generation, right? They're swiping, watching video after, they're not even getting to 60 seconds, they're getting to 30 seconds. So when they go to school, if something is not exciting for them, if it's not creating that dopamine rush, it gets harder and harder for them to go to school, because teachers aren't engaging to them, their friends aren't engaging to them, and so it's difficult, and the real work should happen when kids are born, all the way through elementary school to high school. And so the question for parents about how do I do it with teenagers when they're already at this point is a tough one. And I struggled. My son, he figured it out. The one thing that I have with both of my kids, and I'm lucky, is I got them involved in sports early. So both of my kids are, they started in swimming. They're doing the 5 a.m. practices, the after school
Mm.
practices, and my son was the kid who was banging on the gym door for the janitor to open it. And we had a great janitor who opened the door for him. So, but they had a passion, right? And so it was a lot easier, getting them to school. My son in particular, my daughter, I struggle with, even though I have all these things developed. Every day is a battle, but every day I tap on her door, I get yelled at, and I just wait, and I'm persistent, even if I have to be 10 minutes late for work. And I think that's the key, is you got to stay persistent, and you got to put up with the abuse, almost from your kids, to get them in, because there is this world we live in now. And I know you're feeling it, Cam, where teachers are no longer the deliverers of reading and writing and arithmetic.
Right.
There's an expectation from society that we're also parents, and teachers are struggling because that's not what they were trained for, was to be these parents. But parents expect us to be parents until we're parents, and they don't like how we're parenting, and it's just this
Yeah.
right. And so I think when you talk emotional intelligence, and now I'm going to just back up, you have to start as soon as your kids are born, right? And it starts nowadays with parents putting their phone down and being present.
Mm.
And that's the biggest thing, I think. I've seen, I was actually, my daughter had nationals in Edmonton. It was in your backyard, volleyball nationals. And I was in the Kelowna airport, and there's a little play area in the side for young toddlers, baby, like kids that are crawling, or moms that have little babies and they're holding them go down the slide. And there was, I would say, I took a video of it, and I blurred everybody's picture out, just because I was like, holy shit, this is happening. There was 11 probably families there, and
Yeah.
every one of the parents were on their phone while their kids were playing. Every
Oh
one
my
of them.
goodness.
Yeah. And so you talk purposeful. You're not seeing when your kid is struggling, when they're persevering, when they're successful. And as a parent, to develop emotional intelligence, you have to be purposeful in your observations so that you can encourage at the right time or let them fail at the right time. And if you miss it, you're going to have your kid's going to end up developing issues with attachment very early. They're going to have issues with quitting very early. They're going to have, issues with being able to self-regulate because I don't know, I watched in that half an hour, I don't know, 3 or 4 temper tantrums because their parents weren't paying attention. And when they were failing, it's like, finally, I'm going to get your attention. It's like at the end of the school year, as you know, kids typically will misbehave more because they're upset with us because they have to go home for 2 months and we're not going to keep
Yeah.
teaching them and they miss us and they need
Yeah.
us, right? And so you see it. You see at the end of the year, behavior's always before Christmas, always 2 weeks where
Before
it's just
Christmas, before
crazy.
Easter. Yeah.
Before spring, before summer, and you watch that on a more of a microcosm level early on, and if that keeps going, you end up with teenagers who really don't want to get out of bed and go to school, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of kids growing up right now whose parents were thrown into this digital revolution where, like, I'm in my mid 40s. I didn't have a cell phone until I needed a cell phone. And I was like 22 years old, right? But we have parents now who are raising young kids, and these parents are in their mid 20s, and they are just sucked into their digital device. There's
Hmm.
lack of connection. I love that what you said. You need to see our kids and see them, meaning observe them and celebrate them when they win, and then
Hmm.
let them fail safely, and fail safely by letting them sit in it and challenge themselves and know that you're there to either support them or direct them. And yeah, we have parents who are having a tough time right now engaging with their kids.
Yeah, and to just kind of scaffold on top of the social media and the phone mess is that when parents do finally put their phone down, they overreact. They
Mm.
become helicopter parents or they become lawnmower parents or
Yeah.
or they just disengage completely and they have another family member take care, and then what happens is they're clearing the path for their kids, and there's no trial and error, there's no, parents are so quick, and I'm sure it happens more in the high school, I know, but in the elementary end, parents are so quick to call me, say, their kids in grade 1, 6 years old, Susie was bullied today. And I'm like, oh, okay, tell
Mm-hmm.
me what happened. And then I go down, talk to the classroom teacher, and find, okay, what's the story? Well, Susie wasn't bullied. She got into a conflict with a peer. The kid butted in front of her, and she butted in front of somebody in the slide, so the kid pushed her. That's not bullying. That's a conflict. And the
Conflict.
problem is that when kids are young and they're with their parents or with their siblings, that conflict resolution is not developing through play because they're not playing as much anymore, and parents are jumping in and saying, how dare you hurt my kid, or pointing fingers instead of looking at it as natural consequences happening, right? And that's the other piece that makes it difficult for parents, because I think parents struggle with being tougher because they're worried what other parents are going to think of them,
Yep.
in terms of how they're disciplining, how they're having consequences. Are they too soft? Are they too hard? Are they neglectful? And so parents have this whole, kind of like where teachers are right now, we're being judged and scrutinized. Parents are too, right? And so it's like we're in this world where nobody knows, pardon my French, what the fuck to do anymore, and the recipe is right there in front of us. And I try to, my last few social media posts have been directed at parents, talking about brain science and how to use behavior and engagement to develop it so we can build that grit and perseverance. And I think that's the key is as somebody in my position, I have street cred because I have my own kids, so I know. I have a
Yeah.
son who got suspended from school. As much as he was awesome, he got suspended from school for a few things, right? And my daughter's in girl drama, and I deal with stuff, and I'm trying to do my due diligence. I do a lot of professional development for a lot of schools, and I'm trying to do my part with parents and to communicate what to do to provide them some education as well, because like you said, it's like, what do you do? And that's what my hope is, to try to help them along the way.
That's great. We here are navigating a conversation about how do we get the parents more engaged in the school. How do we get parents more engaged in their child's education and what we're really getting to? And those are two nice things to say. Engaged in the school, engaged in education. How do we get parents more engaged in the lives of their kids? Because that's really what we're seeing is parents who are disengaged, and then they're there for the big moments, or they're there for, I'm sure you see it at volleyball tournaments, especially
Mm-hmm.
club volleyball. It is quite the thing. So when you show up to these tournaments, and I'm like, okay, are you here supporting your child? My kids are younger than yours, but pretty strong athletes in their own right, in their own areas. And I see
Mm-hmm.
parents who are just all in at a soccer game, or my daughter's a competitive climber and they're all in at these meets. And I'm like, are you here for your child, or are you here for you? And then when it's done and that moment is over and that competition is over, then they withdraw. Well, if you're going to be all in for your kid, be all in for your kid all the time.
Yeah.
And parents are struggling with that right now.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting, I'm sure you probably had conversations with you, Stephanie. How do we get parents more engaged? How do we get them involved? Because here's the dilemma that we face in education. And this is one of the things that I push back on schools and I push back on teachers. And I don't want to sound defeatist, but if we're going to waste professional development time and staff meeting time trying to figure out how to get parents engaged in this day and age, you're wasting time. And I don't mean that you can't. I mean that you have to find alternative ways of doing it that are more indirect, more non-threatening. And I think as schools, we always resort to, I'm in an Indigenous school, so it's a little different. When I have a parent gathering, 200 people show up because I'm on an Indian reserve, food, and we feast. And,
Yeah.
whereas if I was in the public school, which I just was, and I had a parent gathering, none of my Indigenous parents would show up because of the residential school effect. And then the parents would show up that I don't want there because their kids have A's and B's, right? So
Right.
I actually moved away from parent-teacher interviews after report cards. I haven't done them in, let's see, one, two, three, my three last schools, my last 13 years. I don't waste my time with them. I have parents, I have my teachers reach out when they need to reach out, and they try to create relationships that way. But in terms of getting parents involved, we always, as teachers in schools, we try to go back to this old method. Well, let's call our kids and tell them something positive about their son or daughter. They don't give a shit. They don't. What they care about, a lot of parents, including parents who do a good job, is what they're seeing on here.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I try to do, or that I encourage, and I've seen a lot of success with it, is I encourage schools to have Facebook pages. I encourage schools to have Instagram pages. The education, and I pointed to these before, these are our common language and our core competencies that we instill in our kids, and we teach them about the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, and emotional intelligence. They go home and educate their parents. They hold their kids accountable. We've actually flipped the script now, where we have kids as the parents doing the educating for our parents, and we're seeing more and more engagement. And what I'm finding is the more social media presence there is, where it's more indirect, and you do these short little, my last few videos have gone from 60 seconds to 9 minutes long, and parents engage, and I break them down into clips, and they're very curious, and I get a lot of direct messages from parents saying, okay, so if I did this, I could be good with this. And I'm like, yeah. And I try to explain to them small micro doses. And I'm not talking about microdosing mushrooms here. I'm talking about microdosing your interactions with your kids. Because a lot of parents, I think, and a lot of schools, they think they got to go all in. Let's go all in. And then it's like, no, we want our parents, to jump in, when there's a spontaneous moment. In education, we call it a teachable moment. And parents don't understand the teachable moments. It's like, you know what? Don't feel pressure because you didn't play with your kid today. Try to jump in 2 or 3 times throughout the day for 5 minutes here, 2 minutes there. And then as you build that up, then add some structured, purposeful play, where you're going to sit down with them and do Play-Doh and do Lego. Because parents are exhausted too, right? They're
Yeah.
exhausted. They're working all day, and I feel for them. But I also, you had kids. You still have a responsibility to raise them, right? And so at the end of the day, we just have to think differently, think outside the box, and get them to understand the science behind emotions, which lead to intrinsic motivation, to passion, to grit, to perseverance, which is emotional intelligence. And we have to, because free play, the days of playing kick the can in the parking lot or street hockey, it doesn't, or the riding bikes,
Yeah.
20 years ago, I couldn't get down the street because the kids were everywhere. Now it's like I'll go for a walk it was great actually. The other day went for a walk and this kid came by me and he had a shovel behind his back and I got knocked off the sidewalk and I'm like, yeah, where's that guy going? So I kind of stopped and I followed him a little bit, and him and his buddy were over there must have been some sort of a creek running, but they were at this cul-de-sac, and I'm thinking they're digging for worms maybe, but I was like, yes, here we go. And so it happens, but if it happened to 80% of our kids back in the day, it's happening only to 20 to 30%. And so without that free play, the emotional intelligence and that development of conflict resolution and communication and collaboration and personal social awareness is just going out the window, right? And so we have to teach parents how to do that, like for the dads out there, purposefully, right?
Yeah. Okay, there's a guy listening to this right now who's being like, okay, I get it. How do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do I start? I hear emotional intelligence, I mean being present and doing this, but what does this actually look like in practice for me? Where is it? I like you said, the microdosing, that's a good
Mm-hmm.
place to start, but what does it look like and what does it mean in brain development, that process?
I'll make it really simple. So as parents, we have our biases. We have, like, I grew up loving sports. Like I actually never learned to skate, believe it or not. I'm one of those Canadians who can't skate, but I grew up with basketball and, I swam and I did all things. One of the things that is one of the cheat codes for parents is to have kids engage in the things that you like to do. And that's where you start. It's like with my kids, I propped my kids both up against the wall with cushions and I rolled balls at them and they fumbled with their little hands and sometimes they'd roll it back because I like to play catch, right? And I know some parents, or like to play Lego. I know I've got a buddy who's all into models, like those airplane modeling and stuff. And so my suggestion to parents is to interact with your kids in things that you're passionate about. And then what you're going to see is that your kids are going to find their own path. They'll either jump onto your passion or they'll find things that they're passionate about. And as soon as that happens, that's when the purposeful piece comes in, where you're now like, okay, my kid's rolling the ball back to me. How do I up the ante? Do I get a bigger ball? Do I get a smaller ball? Do I add goalposts? And that allows your kid then to not only work on those fine motor skills or those gross motor skills physically, but it makes your kid to start to think at a very early age. We're talking when their head stops wobbling, right? You can start doing that stuff. And I think, even chores, for example, I used to mow the lawn and have my son in my backpack, right? And then I had him in the front facing it. And I tried to, as soon as I got his hands on it. And then when I was outside, he had the drill in his hands. And that's where parents, whether you're blue collar, white collar, whatever your profession is, have your kids just follow you, have them follow you around. And then, what you're going to see is all of a sudden when you're out there with your kids and you're doing something in the yard, all of a sudden you might see I'll use my daughter as an example. She watched, I don't know what she was watching. It was Dora or something. All of a sudden it was 4-leaf clovers. She's like, Dad, I need to find a 4-leaf clover. And I'm like, all right. And so now I'm like, here we go. This is intrinsic motivation. This is passion. So next thing I know, for the next 2 weeks, we're in the lawn looking for 4-leaf clovers. And, and then and then because I didn't have a lot of time sometimes too, I'd bought her a magnifying glass. I'm like, here, use this. And now she's learning science, and that's critical thinking. And then she'd be playing independently while I'd be over there moving rocks or, tilling the garden or whatever. The difficult part was my son got a hold of the magnifying glass and started burning insects and lighting things up. But again, learning. And so, and then eventually with my daughter, it moved on. I took them swimming, and so we're always in the pool. And then the Little Mermaid came along, and she's like, Dad, I need a mermaid tail. I'm like, okay. The next thing you know, I'm buying her a mermaid tail. She's in the bathtub with the mermaid tail. She's in the pool with the mermaid tail. And she became one of the top butterflies in the province at 7 years old. And it's those things, right? And as parents grab those passions, when their kids have them, whether it's Lego or Connects or building models or four-leaf clovers, if they grab those passions and they encourage, that's the observation piece. When I talked about those parents in the airport, those are the observation pieces. And that's when you're observing and your kids have those passions and you let them fail and make mistakes, but watch them enough so you know where they're about to hit that point where they just need a little pat on the ass so they get moving, right? You can step in and say, here's some encouragement. Let's take some deep breaths. Let's move forward and get them over the hump so they can keep going. And that's how you develop that emotional intelligence piece. And what I try to do, and I teach it at our school, our 5-year-olds in kindergartens can tell you how the prefrontal cortex works. They can tell you how their amygdala works, and they can tell you about their polyvagal nerve and how it affects your brain and your thinking. They can tell you. If I bring it, like, they can't tell you right away, but by 6 months into kindergarten, they can sit in here and say, because they're having some big emotions, like, okay, first thing we start with is, why are we taking deep breaths? Because it calms our polyvagal. They can't say polyvagal a lot of times. It's funny when they try, because it calms this nerve that's in our body, and it helps soothe our amygdala so we're not in this fight, flight, and freeze response, and then our prefrontal cortex gets stronger. And right through our whole school, our kids know this, and they know and understand the harder they try, the more they persevere, the more they take deep breaths and self-regulate and self-soothe, the stronger they're going to get. And it starts with finding a simple passion like a four-leaf clover.
Yeah. Is it, for the guys who have like kids now, 9, 10, 11, like, oh shoot, I missed it. Is it too late?
No, it's not too late. It's not even too late with my son. I'll use my son because he was basketball, had some scholarship offers when he was done. And he ended up just burning out and said, no, I'm not doing, I'm going into kinesiology. I want to focus on other things. Now he thinks he's going to be a pro golfer because he started golfing. But one of the other things, he's all of a sudden, one day he just kind of was sitting down with me and I was watching a YouTube video on the stuff that's going on in Israel and the Palestinians. I'm like, and he's kind of, poking his head over and he's like, Dad, what are you watching? I'm like, I just sit down for 5 minutes and sit down. And then because he wanted me to make dinner, and he sat down. Next thing I know, he's obsessed with what's going on in Palestine, right? He's obsessed with American politics. He's obsessed with, because we're Italian, right? And he's going to go over and he's backpacking in the summer. But at 18 years old, I purposefully made him sit for 5 minutes because I had a hunch. And next thing you know, we're not talking golf, talking basketball because it's driving me crazy. And now we're talking politics. Now he wakes me up in the morning. Hey, did you see what happened in Israel last night, Dad? Or see what, and so even at 18 years old, and, my daughter's a little tougher because girls are more social. They're more appearance based. They're more popularity based. They care more about what people think. But even with my kids, it's like, and I use this, I will send my daughter, if there's something I want her to learn, I'll send her a little 60-second thing on Instagram. I'll make sure it's funny and it catches her attention because that's the avenue I have to use. And, and I know she'll look at it and I'll ask her, hey, did you see that video? She's watching a video from you. They're probably just nerdy and boring. But then a week later, guess what? That seed's been planted and she says something about it. And so even if your kid is 9, 10, 11, 12, you just have to, and again, I go back to observing and putting your phone down. If you observe your kids and you know your kids, you will know where you can plant a seed, where you can find that teachable moment. And you just have to plant a seed, and 2 weeks later, they'll grab it. Yeah. And it's never too late. Never, ever, ever too late, Yeah.
Well, plant the seed, be patient.
Be patient.
I think we live in a time where we want to see immediate results. And sometimes it doesn't happen that way. Most often.
We're the 60-second generation, right? We watch 60-second videos and swipe.
Yeah. Plant a seed and let it grow. I like that.
Mm-hmm. And it's really hard for educators too, right? Like we do the same thing. It's like sometimes with educators, it's like, if you could see what I see, you would see there's been massive growth, but they just like, right now.
Yeah. It's like, we see on social media those like before and after pictures, but the people who have amazing transformations, they look in the mirror every single day at themselves and they don't see it. And then one day they're walking along and a friend's like, hey, you look great. And they're like, oh, I do. Because in the moment you don't see the change. But like you said, teachers, they're like, oh, we want to see this. We want to see this. And you're like maybe one step removed where you get to see this kid from, these gaps in learning. You're like, oh, there's been a lot of movement I think about
Yeah.
my son. I think about my son's own experience in elementary school, which he's just leaving now,
Hmm.
and how in grade 3 was every night crying, I don't want to go to school. Every night. Don't want to go to school. Hated
Hmm.
it. And here we are, and 2 years later, and that kid had such an incredible experience through his grade 4, grade 5 year that he loves school and he
Hmm.
thrives in the environment. I don't know if he loves school, but I think he loves he had purpose, and he knew that
Yeah.
he could take risks, and he had two teachers who let him take risks and let him move and let him stand up and be a helper and do these things, to the
Yeah.
fact that he's like, he would call himself a leader in his class. Yeah, I'm a class
Yeah.
leader, right? And you
Hmm.
just got to let these seeds, and the teacher that he went into that grade 4 classroom, and she had heard about my son and some of the things, she just planted a seed with him, one at a time, one at a time, until this
Yeah.
point she's like, man, I learned so much from having that kid in my class. And
Yeah.
I just see how much he's learned from having adults who stopped, observed, and gave him time.
Yeah, and you nailed it. You stop, you observe, and you give them time. And one of the things that I get a lot asked a lot when parents and lots of teachers too. I get a lot of DMs from teachers and stuff, and the question is, when should we introduce technology, and like what age? And I laugh and I said, there is no age. I said, you introduce technology to your kids when they are firmly rooted in developing passions. When you know they can go from one passion to the next passion to the next passion, because that means they're intrinsically motivated. And one of the big things, growing up for my kids is we camped a lot, right? And so
Mm.
I remember you'd always have a chopping block, right? And I would take
Yeah,
this axe and I would slam my axe as hard as I could into the block, and I would say only the pure heart can pull that
that's
out. It's
interesting.
like the whole right, take it out of the rock. Who is that
Yes.
guy? The knight that takes it out
Yeah,
of the rock.
sword in the stone. Yeah.
Sword in the stone, right? And so they would reef on it and reef on it, and my kids are little, right? And so they would kind of pry it away, and I'm like, yes, you're pure heart. And then I would let them take the axe and swing it, and my wife at the time would be like, what are you doing giving them an axe? I'm like, don't worry about it. I mean, if they miss,
Yeah.
it's going to be a cut, whatever. You know how dads
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But just things like that. We'd camp, and for 3 days they'd be like, I want to see who's pure heart, and it was a passion, and that's it's like the four leaf clover, the mermaid tail, basketball, volleyball, swimming, whatever it is, the kids, Lego, Play-Doh, whatever they're into. Once your kids develop passions and you can see them have that intrinsic motivation to learn and explore and think critically and creative, then you're safe. But if
Yeah.
you introduce technology before they have that intrinsic motivation, boy, oh boy, I mean, you can still get technology out. You have to transition it out, but it's going to be harder. And so for some kids, they develop, intrinsic motivation by the time they're 5, 6, 7. And, I think my kid, my son, I didn't have gaming systems when we had COVID. He was 14 or 15. And I'm like, I'm a principal. Homeschooling sucked. I couldn't do it. I was
Yeah.
like, I can't do this. But anyway, so I'm like, he's like, Dad, can I get an Xbox? I'm like, you know what? Sure. And so we got NBA 2K and NFL, and we got Madden and all that. And you know what? He played it for the first 2 or 3 days, and it was like, grabbed his
Yeah.
basketball, went outside, and it's become a lot easier, in terms of they both are in Instagram, they both have Snapchat, they both are on their phones, but they both can put their phones down and go to practice for 3 hours. They can put their phone down and have a conversation with their friends. My son's talking to me about he went to a staff party last night, and he's 19, and these 21-year-old girls were hitting on him. I don't think they know my age, Dad, but I was chatting them up, and I'm like, awesome. I said, where were your phones? He's like, oh, they're just on the table. But he's talking. He's not like, hey, can I get your snap? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
he's having real life interactions. It's because early on they developed the intrinsic motivation through my interest. I love fishing. I love both of my kids hate it. So that was a big fail for me. But they still love basketball and swimming. So I won there.
Yeah.
And that's the key. So I think when parents ask, and that's why I have a tough time, and I don't know if they've done it in Alberta, but in BC, they've completely banned phones in high schools, and they've done the
Yeah.
same in
We did the same
Ontario. And
here. Yeah.
yeah, and I've had so many conversations with teachers who are unhappy and parents who are unhappy because now parents were happy at first, but now guess
Hmm.
what those kids are doing when they get home? It's more of a battle for parents to keep their kids off their technology. And then they give up because they don't want to have the battle, and they don't know how to microdose or transition properly the right behaviors and stuff. And I mean, in elementary schools, we have no technology besides our stuff in the classroom, so it's not a big deal for us. But I have so many senior level high school teachers, like, I don't have enough. There's not enough computer carts. The laptops are broken down. They're missing keys. It doesn't work. I wish my Calculus 11 kids could just grab their phone.
Yes.
And so you're seeing this whole hodgepodge of, you know what? Well, I'm taking it completely away instead of using education. And I think, and that's the perfect storm of people not knowing what the hell to do, right? And
Right.
hence the reason why we're on podcasts, and you're doing what you're doing and
Yeah.
I'm doing what I'm doing, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Talked a lot about observation, giving space, and then challenging, and these little pieces that we can do. I just want one more question on that topic.
Sure.
What do you look for? There's the guys that, okay, I'm observing my kid. What am I looking for? How do I know? And I had this conversation with dad at soccer last night. He's like, I don't even know if my kid's a well-adjusted kid or not. Like, I just see him and I'm so used to him. And then I see him like this in this environment. And I'm like, my kid's an idiot. I'm like, he's not. Like, your kid is normal. Trust me.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what are you looking for?
Easy for us to say, hey, because we have a standardized view of what kids are like.
Yeah, we just see
It,
so many.
it's yeah, we see it all. We see it all. And it's funny. It's not what you see; it's about what you feel. And you have kids, so you know this.
Yep.
When my kids hurt themselves, there's the cry, and then there's the cry. And I
Yes.
know when I hear a certain cry, oh
It's
boy, I better
serious.
go, because because I've raised my kids to suck it up, right? I'm that dad. Whatever. Sorry, dads out there. I'm that dad. Mom, sorry. But I know when there's that cry, or my son. My son's awesome. He calls me. He talks. My daughter, yeah, I've got to drag conversations at him, but right away I can feel it in his voice. All of a sudden the tone changes, and it's like, as a parent, you can feel it. And when you're watching, you can, and you're seeing your kids with certain behaviors, and all of a sudden you feel a shift. Pay attention, because it's like something's making you, like that dad who's on the soccer field going, this is my son.
Yeah.
This is a dad who doesn't know what his son looks like in a group setting, like a classroom, which most parents don't. They think that their kids are in a class by themselves and they're angels all the time and whatnot, right? And the key is for him is to be able, or her, mums and dads, is to trust your instinct. And when you feel something, again, when your phone is down and you can be sitting in, like, I think of my daughter with the 4-leaf clover and my son with the magnifying glass. It's like I was busy doing something, whatever, and I'm like, something's too quiet. And I look over, and we're in BC, and I'm the same thing in Alberta with forest fires are a thing here, right? I'm like,
Oh yeah.
something's. And I'm like, holy shit, he's got a little fire going over here because of the magnifying glass. It's like, and I wasn't really observing, but I sensed it because I was still paying attention, but I was still doing my own thing. So
Yeah. It's a little too
it's a
quiet.
yeah, and it's about being in tune. And so when you hear the word observe, you think you should just be watching and have your glasses on, and you have to be careful, because that's when you become overprotective. That's when you become a helicopter parent or a lawnmower parent, and you don't allow it. So it's more, when you talk about observation, it's that intuition, it's that feeling, it's
Yeah.
that you sense it, and you
Connectedness.
use
Yeah.
all of that connectedness. And if, unfortunately, if you've had your phone in your hand since your child was at birth, you might not know your kid that well, and it goes back to putting your phone down, and that dad should have trusted his gut. And then the key thing is, if this dad's listening, if there's something in the soccer game that he was like, oh, that was really, oh, what a dick, like, I got to talk to, he needs to find one thing, not the 10 things that he didn't like about his kid. And he needs to have that conversation, or find the teachable moment to say, hey, remember when you're doing this? And it's like, let
Yeah.
me tell you about a time when I was a kid and what happened to me when that, and that's one other thing that parents should do, is when they do observe and they do interact, tell a story about yourself so your kids know that you're not perfect either.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, of course, age appropriate stories and whatnot.
Yes.
And it's funny because now my son's 19, and he's going to backpack through Europe, and I can now tell him some of the stories that I experienced when I backpacked, right? Which is a lot
Right.
different than when he was 12. But I think that's the key when it comes to that observation piece, is you just gotta be in tune. and trust your
Yeah.
gut, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that comes with that connection piece way back at the
Yep.
beginning where you put, yeah, I love it.
Absolutely.
Leroy, man, doing good work. So, you mentioned a couple books. I didn't know you wrote a couple books. If somebody wants
Yeah.
to learn more about your books and what you're doing, where can they find that information?
Well, they can go to my website, which is emotionalschools.com, and that's where I get bookings from. Like if your school wanted to
Yeah.
bring in and do an emotional, train your staff in emotional intelligence, how to embed it, they go there. They could email me, ask for consultation, but all my resources are on there. My email's on there. That's the best place to go. If they want to just find books that I've written, they can go to Amazon. And I actually have 4 books that I've written. So I've written
Okay.
Emotional Schools, a Looming Mental Health Crisis and a Pathway Through It, where I really dive into the science of emotions. Well, first I talk about the storm we're in terms of education and parenting. And then I talk about the science of emotions and I get into, you know, the brain and all that sort of stuff. And then I've written another book on leadership for guys like you who are trying to lead from an emotionally intelligent place instead of this archaic old school way. I don't know how old the principal
Right.
is at your school, but they like to do things a certain way. Like I don't have a principal's office, for
The same
example.
age.
Hey,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah, right.
the
And
principal
so,
at our school and I are the same age, so it's good.
oh, are you? Oh, okay. So hopefully he's a little more, he's progressive. And one of my biggest pet peeves is there's a teacher that's on the island right now, and she's trying so hard to convince her admin group to bring me in to get her staff and her structure emotionally intelligent because it'll lead to more academic success. It just does,
Yeah.
plain and simply.
Yeah.
All your results. But these principals are so old school. They're like, no, no, we better have a professional development on assessment, or let's have another literacy workshop. And it's like, and meanwhile, 85% of the schools in the district are chaotic, right? And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how many literacy workshops. I don't care how good the pedagogy is. If kids can't and if teachers aren't emotionally intelligent and kids aren't emotionally intelligent, you're going nowhere, right? So
Yeah.
that's what I've been trying to do. And then I wrote, because a big part of the science of emotions is breathing and self-soothing, self-regulating. I did a fun little book, 50 breathing strategies for parents and teachers, which you can get on
Oh,
Amazon.
awesome.
And
Yeah.
then, of course, structured and free play is super important. So at my school, I do 2 recesses and a lunch because I try to encourage free play as much as possible because that's where the students are interacting and all those emotional intelligence skills, which was those posters up there, is happening. And so I wrote a book called Let's Play Bruh, and it's a book of about 50 games that teachers can use and parents can use. And I called it Let's Play Bruh because I think my kids have been calling me that. I haven't heard the word dad in a while, so
Yeah.
that's kind of spoofs on that. So yeah, they can go on Amazon, but my website is where you'll find all the information in terms of what I do with workshops and professional development or keynote speaking or whatever. It's all on there. Yeah.
Amazing. Leroy, I have a question for you. You just mentioned your kids calling you bruh.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
as a dad right now, you're in a point of transition, but as a dad, what's an area that you're excited about or an area of growth that you're diving into?
Oh man, you know what? I want some vulnerability. This year I was a bit depressed because my son was gone, and
Mm.
because I've coached my son since he was in grade 8. I followed him up like in his grade 11 year. Like we were in Oklahoma, Oregon, like we're basketball
Wow.
in it,
Yeah.
and I coached the senior boys, and then he left. I stopped coaching senior boys basketball. Stopped being with my son at practices.
Hmm.
Then I started like clinging to my daughter with volleyball. I take her to all her tournaments. I can't go to her practices, and I'd like to come in, but she won't let me. But uh, you know, I'm trying to come to grips with the fact that my daughter's going into grade 12. My son's home now, and he's driving me
Yeah.
nuts. And I wish he was back at college. But I think what we have to do, and this is to the dads out there and to yourself, you need to make sure that you're cherishing your kids when they're little, when they want that extra story at night. Don't get frustrated. If they want to stay in the bathtub for 10 minutes, let them stay in for 10 minutes. One of the things I'm learning here, and I hope this isn't offensive, but I'm being in an indigenous community, I'm learning a lot about Indian time. And,
Mm.
there's a stigma attached to it where they think indigenous people are lazy, but that's not what it's about. It's Indian time is about stopping and smelling the roses. And we don't have bells at the school. And I've really learned how to just embrace the moment, whether it takes an extra 5 minutes or you get finished 5 minutes sooner. And I really encourage parents to enjoy when your kids are little, when you're looking for that four-leaf clover, and they turn into teenagers, to go to every game. It doesn't matter if you're tired and you're going into work with greasy pants and your hands are, and I think, in terms of where I am and the depressed feeling I had this year, missing my boy and being that dad there, and all his buddies not coming around anymore, and is to cherish it.